Now I know what you're thinking. Why the fuck is this video entitled Darkness Reviews Duo? Well, you see, duo is Latin for two. And I'll be covering two games. So I thought, maybe make it a title. And if you're wondering, well, Darkness, you've done videos where you cover 3 games before. Why not make that? Well, that's because this time the games really have nothing to do with each other than genre. And the only reason I'm covering both of them is because reviewing Devil May Cry got me in the mood to play both of them. And since they've been requested like a gajillion times each, I decided to just cover both of them at the same time, because why the fuck not? There's really no reason not to. If I was just doing like a series, I would just say Darkness Reviews this series like I've done in the past, but this time it's 2 games that have nothing to do with each other than genre and developer, actually. So I'm just going to call it something else. It doesn't even matter. It's just a Darkness Reviews with a little extra word, and you should all just deal with it and move on. Get on with your lives. More important things to worry about. You could go out and start a family with some girl or guy if you're a girl. Although I don't think any girls watch this show. Maybe 1 or 2. Maybe even 3. That would be amazing. Anyway, let's just get into it. I'm going to start with Metal Gear Rising, because it's the more recent game and it's been requested a lot because I did a stream of it where I played through the entire game. And I wanted to talk about this game because I've heard a lot of things about it, and a lot of the complaints I've heard about the game don't exist. I mean, the complaints exist, but the reasons specified in the complaints make no motherfucking sense to me. So I really wanted to get my opinion out there on this, because I'm not understanding where, am I playing the same game as other people, is my question. Let's just get into it, and I'll explain what I mean. Okay, Metal Gear Rising is a Metal Gear spin-off game, obviously, because it's not Metal Gear Solid, it's Metal Gear Rising. So, the gameplay is completely different, but it's got that traditional Metal Gear style to it. It's got a really good plot, it's got codec conversations, etc., etc. It's really the core game mechanics that are completely fucking different. It's more like akin to Ninja Gaiden or Devil May Cry or Bayonetta, where you walk forward, you kill a bunch of enemies, and you keep walking forward. That's kind of how the game works. I'm sure you're familiar with the concept by now. And it works really well. Before I get into that, I want to talk about the story, because that's where the first complaint had come up, that apparently this game's story isn't very good. And again, are we playing the same game, guys? I'm just saying, because, well, for one, in order to get a lot of the story details, much like in other Metal Gear games, you have to take part in the codec conversations. This is very important to understand what is really going on a lot of the time. I mean, you can understand the gist of everything, but in order to get details about characters and, developments and, enemies and stuff like that, you have to call people on the codec, and that's nothing new. Metal Gear Solid has always done that since the very first game on the PlayStation. So, I'm not really sure where people were coming from, and, in terms of the plot being weak, I'm not going to go into details on the plot because I don't want to spoil anything, because it is really good in my opinion. The only thing I'll say is that if you are not the least bit mentally disturbed by the idea of kidnapping children, ripping their brains out, and forcing them into VR simulations so they can become, murderous cyborgs, you don't have a soul. Or a conscience. That's really fucked up. Like seriously. Maybe that's just something that weirds me out personally, but, that just... No. Jesus Christ, that's fucked up. Okay, let's just move on. Let's get into the actual, graphics and sound before we get into gameplay, because, we gotta cover those two things. Graphics are really freaking good. The game looks really nice. No complaints there, and the sound is fucking amazing!
Yes! Swing it wide open!
The music in this game is awesome. Like, seriously. I freaking love the music in this game. And I wish the soundtrack that came with my copy of the game actually had the vocal tracks on it, because because it doesn't, and I got really sad when I popped it in to listen to it. It was depressing. But yeah, music, fucking awesome. Definitely full marks for that. Let's get into the gameplay, though, because that's the meat of the game. That's what everyone wants to hear about. The gameplay, I want to say it's similar to Ninja Gaiden, but that's not really true. It's sort of... How do I explain this? It's sort of a blend of that and maybe a little bit of Bayonetta, because this is from the same developer as Bayonetta, so obviously there's some influence there, but it's not even similar to that. It's its own thing, which is good. But in terms of what the game is and what the game's really about, let me try to explain. You have light attacks and heavy attacks. It sounds, you know, simple enough, but the game is about cutting and slicing, which was always the concept that, you know, when Hideo Kojima really even started out, you know, the idea behind this game. That was the idea, was, you know, that you'd be able to cut anything. And the influence of that original concept, while not coming to complete fruition with this, is still there. And you could still cut a lot of stuff. And people cut, you know, exactly on the line where your sword hit. So that's something that's really unique to this game, and the detail is remarkable, quite frankly. But in terms of the actual combat, basically the idea is... This is a counter parry game, like at the end of the day. You know, a lot of other games of this type rely a lot on dodging. That is not what this game's about at all. Dodging, there's only a handful of times where it happens, but the main thing the game encourages you to do is to block and parry people. And that's done with the light attack button. There's no single block button, which is odd, actually. I've never seen that. Well, I have, but anytime I've seen it before, it didn't work too well. Here, it works really well, actually. Basically, you block by hitting towards an enemy and hitting the light attack button. And one of the complaints I originally had was that this kind of turns into a button masher, because all you're doing is hitting the light attack button over and over and over and over again. But you can't hammer block in this game. You have to time it, because if you don't, Raiden doesn't stay blocking. That doesn't happen. So, you know, you can, you know, be hit if he, you know, stops blocking, if you time it wrong, or if you're just hammering block on one enemy, another enemy is just going to hit you from behind, because, you know, a block doesn't make you invincible. So there is a lot of skill involved, and there are times where light attack just doesn't work. You have got to hit with, you know, a heavy attack, whether it be because of armor, or actually that's almost always the reason. The enemy has too much armor, you have to hit them with a heavy attack. So they did a lot of work to encourage the idea of not hammering block and trying to become more skillful with it. So I really appreciate that in itself. And it does make for a fun experience overall. I vastly enjoy the gameplay style, and I've never really seen a game of this type yet that really centers around the idea of blocking and parrying. You could do it in other games, but a lot of the other games had, like, dodge rolls. Dodge rolls left and right all the fucking time. You know, whether it be Devil May Cry 3, whether it be God of War, or whether it be Ninja Gaiden. You know, blocks may somewhat exist in those games, but the main thing you do to avoid attacks is dodge roll all the fucking day. And the idea of blocking, parrying really hasn't been executed this well, in my opinion, so far. So I really like that about this game. Now, what about the boss fights? The boss fights are fucking amazing. This is one of the most satisfying games I've ever played. Like, seriously. In terms of what you do in the game, you just feel good at the end, because you just feel like a fucking badass. And, you know, just beating a really tough boss, or beating a really big group of enemies, it's just a really satisfying, it's a feel-good kind of game. And that, in itself, is just great. Now, in terms of complaints about gameplay, I've heard two things that, well, I haven't heard two things, I heard one thing that spawns two issues that I really don't understand, but let me try to explain. Okay, the complaint I heard is that the controls are too complicated, which I have no understanding of that at all, because I just got done playing Devil May Cry 3, and I can tell you that that game had a more complex system when it came to just simply holding down R1 in that game made the game more complex than this, because you really only ever have to worry about two buttons, well, three buttons, I'm sorry. and that third button doesn't get pressed nearly that often. So, like, the idea that this game's controls are too complicated, well, then your hands will probably fall off if you play Devil May Cry 3, and I'd even argue the same thing about other games such as Bayonetta and Ninja Gaiden. The game's control scheme really isn't that complicated at all. It's quite simple. Actually, it's one of the most simple control schemes I've ever seen. In fact, I'd almost argue it's too simple, because I don't think the B button really does anything in combat ever. You know, that could have been an addition. You know, I mean, it does things out of combat, but you know, it could have been a third attack button. That would have been, you know, interesting. But you know, they didn't do that, which is fine. But I'm just saying, like the idea that, oh, the controls are too complicated. Where the fuck do you get that idea? The second thing, I think I know where this complaint comes from, and I think it's from manual slicing. See, you can enter a different game mode called Blade mode. Not game mode, that implies it's different from the main game, sorry. A different mode in combat called Blade mode. And this is used to cut, you know, very precise strikes on enemies. Usually to cut them in half. And there are times where the game actually tells you when you should enter Blade mode, and then you can cut an enemy in an exact spot and take out their electrolytes and use it to heal yourself. It's actually a game mechanic to do that. Now, the thing with Blade mode is that you control it one of three ways. There's horizontal strikes and there's vertical strikes. Those are the first two ways. And those are done with the X and Y buttons on the 360 version. Probably square and triangle on the PS3 version. This means that you use the same two buttons that you would use in normal combat, so I'm not sure how that's more complicated. The only thing that is complicated is manual strikes, which is a thing. And basically, this is where you use the right analog stick to control where your you know, blade lands, and you can do it in any direction. This takes a lot of fucking getting used to. I'll admit that. Maybe this is where the complicated control idea was coming in, but for one, I'm not sure how else they would have done something like this. It's done well for what it's supposed to be. And for two, yeah, it takes a lot of getting used to, but once you get it, it's actually pretty simple. Plus, you almost never have to fucking do this. There are literally 2 times in the game that I can think of, and they were 2 boss fights, where you actually have to do manual strikes in order to beat the boss. Now, you might say, oh man, but well, I'm not really good at manual strikes. Well, yeah, I understand, you know, there is a learning curve involved with it, but again, it only happens 2 times where you need to do it, and it's not that hard once you get the hang of it. But I do understand, you know, maybe the thing's too loose, maybe, but I don't know. I didn't have as many issues as a lot of other people seem to. Maybe it's me. Maybe, you know, I just happen to be really good at the game, just out of, you know, coincidence. But I didn't have nearly as many issues with it as a lot of people seem to. I think a lot of people were actually dismissing it because it's not Metal Gear Solid. I wanted Snake. Snake's my favorite. It's a spin-off game. It's supposed to be different. That was the point. I don't understand this idea of, oh, it's not like the other. It's not fucking supposed to be like Metal Gear Solid. That's why it's not called Metal Gear Solid. It's called Metal Gear Rising. Difference. Anyway, the other thing I want to say is that I said the boss fights are really good, and they are. But one of the reasons I think they're really good is that each boss asks you to do something different. Like I said, 2 of them specifically require you to do precise strikes. And the other ones, like, one is completely about blocking and parrying, period. And the other one is about, you know, quickly attacking and running away, hit and run tactics. Just the idea there's so many different concepts going with the bosses, it makes every single boss feel really unique. And I appreciate that, because the thing I've noticed about a lot of games recently is that, other than, honestly, this genre in particular, the idea of boss fights is, like, being lost somehow, and I'm not sure why. Like, you play a lot of other games, like specifically in the first-person shooter genre, it's like, bosses? What's a boss? You know, bosses, these things that like every single fucking game used to have, you know, they're really fun. Should try them sometime. Just saying. Anyway, but that's about all I gotta say about Metal Gear Rising. Like I said, really good game, and I highly recommend it. Now let's move on to Bayonetta. Now Bayonetta, again, by the same developer, Platinum, but a very different game, even though it's in the same genre, and obviously older than Rising, just by a few years. Let's talk about this game. I've gotten a lot of people asking me what I think about Bayonetta, and, you know, I really like it. Like, I really do. There's one thing about it that I don't understand, in terms of what people say about it, because it really doesn't make any sense, but I'll get to that later. Okay. Without getting into too many details, story, really fucking good. It's a very over-the-top kind of game. In fairness, so is Rising. But, you know, it's like almost goofy in a sense, but at the same time, the plot can be taken very seriously, and you actually, you know, get attached to characters, and it's very well written. So just the fact that they did an over-the-top plot that's really goofy, but still making you take it seriously, can attest to how good the writing is in the game. Now, graphics for the time are actually really good. Rising's are better, but it's newer, so you'd expect that. And, you know, but for the time, the graphics were freaking outstanding for Bayonetta. And honestly, they still held up really well. It still looks like a really good game. You know, it still looks good. Music is interesting. You know, I really like the music, but it's like nothing I would normally listen to. You know, you just have to go listen to it. Like, it's good. Don't get me wrong. It's just, it's not, you know, the traditional rock like you'd hear me listen to. You know, but it's good music. You know, it's good. It's just really hard for me to explain. You know. Anyway, but I want to talk about the gameplay specifically, because this is like, this game and Rising are like two sides of the same coin. Remember how I said in Rising, you know, it's about blocking and parrying? Well, in Bayonetta, it's completely about fucking dodging. Period. I think there is a block move in the game, and you can parry, but it's actually quite difficult to use, and there's no real reason to do it because the game encourages you to dodge. There's actually an ability called Witch Time that activates if you dodge at the last second, which basically slows down time, except for, you know, Bayonetta, and lets you attack enemies without, you know, having to be worried about getting attacked in return. It's a really neat mechanic, and I really like it. Dodging actually takes a lot of practice, too, because you have to learn to read every individual enemy in terms of when they're going to attack. And it's not like you can just go around spamming dodge. It doesn't work. You know, and it's actually one of the complaints I heard. Oh, you can just spam dodge all day, and you'll win. No, you fucking can't. I know this, because I tried it, and I got my ass beat. So, you know, that's not true at all. You know, and with practice, of course, you know, you're going to get really good at Witch Time, but, you know, but if you get really good at the game and you still want a challenge, then just play on the game mode that takes away Witch Time. Yeah, that does exist. So, you know, there you fucking go. Have fun. Combos are, I would say, in terms of combos, this game is actually better than Rising. There's just a lot more combos to do, as far as I can tell, and they're more clearly defined, because, like, in the load screen, it lets you practice your combos, and everything just chains well into itself. You can be in the middle of a combo and dodge, and then go right back into a combo. It doesn't, there's no interruptions, I think is the best way to do it. I mean, you know, you don't literally go back in the combo, I don't think. It doesn't pick up where you left off. But it doesn't break your chain of attacks, is what I'm trying to say. In a lot of other games, when you dodge, it sort of interrupts you, and you have to, like, restart from scratch, and it can be very disjointing in combat. But here, dodging is completely blended in between doing combos. So you can be in the middle of something, dodge, and go back into something, and it won't really mess you up in terms of, you know, what you were doing. It feels like you meant to do it as part of the combo. You know what I mean? It's a really, really, really well orchestrated game. Now, boss fights are also really good, but I do have one big, giant motherfucking complaint when it comes to the bosses. They fucking love to rehash some of the early boss fights, and that's a big pet peeve of mine. You know, boss rushes are one thing, but my fucking Jesus tap dancing Christ on a stick, don't fucking make me re-fight the same bosses more than once, okay? Beyond that, then I start getting pissed, and Bayonetta does that a lot. It's annoying. I mean, they aren't actually the same exact bosses, but they're similar enough to the point where I can tell that they got lazy, you know? Like, give me a different enemy type that's similar to that. You don't have to rehash the same model. Thank you. I understand you gotta cut somewhere, but it's just frustrating to see that in a game, especially one that I like so much. In addition, another complaint I have is with the system of purchasing abilities. Now, in Rising, I didn't mention this, you purchase your abilities based off of skill points that you get by how well you did in the game. And I like that system. It rewards you for being good. The thing with Bayonetta is that while there are things set to reward you for being good at the game, the main way you get your currency is just by beating enemies straight up. More like, you know, something like God of War, you know. And I fucking hate that, because it basically turns the game into a grind fest where all you really do is just kill enemies to get your stuff. And, you know, like I said, I know that the game does reward you somewhat for being good, but it's not nearly as obvious as in Rising, and I prefer that system more than this one. In addition, another complaint I have, yeah, I know, I have a few complaints, but they're all really minor. Yeah, I really like this game, don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying, basically any game mode, there are a few, you know, gimmick parts of the game that isn't, you know, the fighting isn't really that well done, and I don't really like them very much. Some of them go on for way too fucking long, and other ones just really aren't that fun. I'm just not crazy about, you know, the additional game modes tacked on. If they were more well done, I might like them, but they're just not as good as just fighting. Now, there is one thing about this game that I keep hearing. I've always heard it since the beginning, and it just drives me nuts. I'm well aware that the big guy behind Devil May Cry, I don't even know his name, worked on this game. I think I actually have the same producer. So naturally comparisons are going to be made. They're in the same genre, I get that. But a lot of people say, "Oh yeah, Bayonetta, that's a lot like Devil May Cry." No, it's really not, like, at all. I have no idea where anybody gets that fucking idea, because I literally just got done playing the first 3 Devil May Cry games, and I went on to play this, and I'm not seeing it, guys. Okay, it works completely differently. Not only are there 2 attack buttons, which is different from every Devil May Cry game that isn't 3, but it's more, the combos are more like something you'd find in Ninja Gaiden or God of War, where, you know, you chain them and they're clearly defined and it's fast paced. It doesn't work like Devil May Cry at all. Plus, it has a single dodge button, which only exists in Devil May Cry 2. And then you have the Witch Time thing, which didn't exist in Devil May Cry at all, as far as I know. I mean, I'm not saying Devil May Cry is bad. Again, you know, I already got done reviewing that. We already went over that. But I'm saying that comparing the games, like, they're not the same in any real way other than genre and basic idea, which is, you good guy, you kill enemies, destroy. I mean, that's really all you have in terms of similarities between the 2 games. They're really not the same thing. I even got some people, you know, who are big Devil May Cry fans, who were saying how they don't like Bayonetta because, you know, they didn't like the over-the-topness, they didn't like how the combat worked. And I'm like, I mean, is that not proof enough that people who really like Devil May Cry are saying, yeah, they're really not the same? They're not. So I'm not sure where all these comparisons are coming from, because they're not the same game at all. I mean, I guess it really doesn't matter. My point is that Bayonetta is really fucking good. Okay, that's all I really gotta say. It's a fun game, and I really like it, and you should definitely give it a try if you haven't. Now, what about the differences between Bayonetta and Rising? You know, I'm talking about both games, I might as well talk. They're by the same, you know, developer. I think the big thing between the 2 games, let's say you haven't played either of them, and you just want to play one. Okay, the games, I think the best way to differentiate these 2 games is this. If you like the idea of dodging with quick strikes more, then go with Bayonetta. And if you like the idea of blocking and parrying, then go with Rising. Because that's the big difference here between the 2 games, is that both have a different focus. One focuses on dodging, one focuses on blocking. And whether, you know, you prefer either one is really up to you. I think they're both really good and really fun games, and you should try out both of them, but if you had to pick one, that should be your deciding factor. That's really all I gotta say. I enjoyed being able to play these 2 games again. They're both really fun. I really like them a lot. Rising is the best game I've played in a really long time. So, you know, it's really all I gotta say. If you don't like these games for some twisted reason, I get that. You know, everyone has a different taste. But it's just some of the complaints with the games, specifically Rising, that I don't really understand. I think they're based more on the fact that it's not Metal Gear Solid than anything. And that's not really fair at all. But, anyway, that's all I gotta say. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.